everyone. We're just waiting for two more commissioners and then we'll get started. Okay, Commissioner Stevens just messaged me that she'll be a few minutes late. But it is 7:01, so let's get started. We have a short agenda tonight, just one item on our list. However, we would like to add an additional item to the list, which is to discuss the Streeters program. So all those in favor of adding that to the agenda, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. And just for context, this came from D.
Commissioner
Super.
Felskini, you're either on mute or something.
Can you not hear me?
I can't hear you. I can see you talking.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jake.
Can you hear me now? Test, test, test.
Yeah, you sound good.
Lee, I think it's your speakers.
Okay, there we go.
You got it?
Yep.
Cool. And I just wanted to add for context, the reason why we're seeking to add it late is because we got it from D. Super late, but they have asked for ANC feedback by mid-November. And because we only have an ANC committee meeting in early November, that would be able to get it to them, the feedback in time. For that mid-November deadline that they set, we needed to add it kind of last minute to our agenda because we got it late.
Okay. All those in favor of adding it to the agenda? Yes?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. All right, so first up, we're going to see a presentation by DDOT regarding an ADA parking pilot program for multifamily buildings. If you are here to present about that, please raise your hand and we will make you a panelist. Hey, Matthew.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
You're very faint. We have a hard time hearing you.
Oh. Can you guys hear me better now?
Slightly better.
Yep.
All right. Can you guys see the presentation?
Not yet. Do you share screen or?
Yeah, I did. I'm not sure. Can you guys see that now?
Yes.
All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Matthew Spaniel from the Curbside Management Division at DDOT, and I'm here to talk a bit about our accessible residential permit parking pilot program. So we at the Curbside Management Division maintain all residential and commercial curbside operations and infrastructure within the district, which includes accessible parking. The current programs that we offer in the district are red top meters, which are, in the central business district downtown, and then our accessible stadium zone parking that is in the stadium zone area, around Navy Yard and around Audi Field in Southwest, and a residential disability permit parking permit program. So that residential disability parking permit or RDPP program allows eligible residents to apply for a reserved space on their block of residence. They must meet all the necessary requirements of the program to acquire this permit. Those requirements are living in a single family dwelling unit, not having any access to a garage, driveway, or carport, and not having any private alley parking. So some common reasons why a resident may be denied this permit is them living in a multifamily dwelling unit, which is a common, request we get from residents of those, and we have to deny it because they're not eligible for the program. Then also sometimes there's additional curbside restrictions in front of their residents, be it bus lanes or rush hour restrictions that prevent us from installing that space in front of their residents. So something that we've been working on over the past fiscal year is sort of cleaning up and revamping our accessible parking programs, and standardizing them to apply to our different standard programmings that we have on blocks. So you're going to start seeing a lot more of these around the city. The blue accessible meter parking sign that is already in effect in our stadium zone, but we're going to be expanding those to replace the red top meters that you see currently downtown in the Central Business District, and also expanding these outside of the CBD as some of our other projects come online. So around U Street for the performance parking pilot, you may have seen some of these popping up. And they will be expanding elsewhere in the city in the future. And then our accessible RPP, which I will get into in the coming slides, will expand accessible parking in residential zones for those that may not be eligible for RDPP. And then also for our unregulated blocks, that sign will be put in place when we receive requests for accessible parking where there's no other regulations on that block. So our accessible RPP pilot program works in conjunction with the residential permanent parking program by providing a designated accessible space on RPP program blocks for shared use among residents, any resident with a an applicable zone permit and a valid RPP sticker. Residents with valid placards and RPP stickers for that applicable zone will be allowed to park in that zone for an unlimited amount of time, essentially. So it functions a bit more like resident only parking for those with valid placards. The reason for that being, we don't really have a good way of communicating the zone, the time limit exemption, and the placard requirement on one single sign. So this is, the best regulation where we could communicate both of those, but still allow parking exclusive to residents, within that RPP zone. So we selected 5 locations to pilot test these spaces. They were selected based on the following criteria. So RPP programming on that respective block. The presence of at least one multifamily building housing senior or disabled residents. Actually, that was not one of the requirements. Let's go over that one. And then unobstructed access to an ADA compliant curb ramp with a sidewalk connecting directly to the building entrance of that senior or disabled housing complex on that building. On that block. And then also a speed limit of no more than 25 miles an hour. Oh, and no more than one travel lane in each direction. So we selected 5 pilot locations based on that criteria across 4 wards. So in Ward 1, we have the 1600 block Fuller Street Northwest, which is within ANC 1C. And then also the 2100 block of 4th Street Northwest. In Ward 3, we selected the 4200 block of Butterworth Place Northwest. And in Ward 7, we selected the 1800 block of C Street Northeast. And in Ward 8, we selected the 1200 block of Tablet Street Southeast. So these locations were chosen based off of their, meeting the previous criteria that I outlined on the criteria that I outlined on the previous slide. And also we looked at our meter transaction data and identified locations that were within a quarter mile of our highest meter transaction zones. So we wanted to identify locations where there was, high parking demand already on these blocks among non-residents that, may have been impacting the supply of, the availability of parking that's accessible to those buildings. So again, the location that's within your ANC is the 1600 block of Fuller Street Northwest. We are still many of these are, well, 2 out of 3 locations are actually still within the installation queue, so we're waiting on those to be installed. The one on Fuller Street is estimated to be installed by the 5th of November. And I'll get into this in the evaluation slide coming up, but we're going to be distributing surveys to residents of Cerro Circle that is adjacent to the space to as part of the pilot evaluation. So just getting into one of the other goals of this program overall is to move our accessible parking closer to federal guidelines. The public right-of-way accessibility guidelines are the federal guidelines for pedestrian facilities in the public right-of-way. That's applicable to Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that establishes minimum design and location standards for accessible on-street parking spaces. This rule, although it's been adopted by, or it's been published by the U.S. Access Board, hasn't been adopted by the Department of Transportation or Department of Justice yet, so it's not currently federally enforceable, but we are looking to, make this a requirement for all of our, accessible spaces to be signed as such. They would have to meet the technical and scoping standards of ProWag. So I'm not going to get too in the weeds of that, but generally, the space needs to be adjacent to a accessible curb ramp connecting to a sidewalk, and there can't be any obstructions between the vehicle and that curb ramp or within the center 10 feet adjacent to the sidewalk or between the vehicle and the sidewalk. And, all right. So our evaluation metrics for the pilot are as follows. So we will be conducting field observations to measure occupancy and compliance with the regulations posted on the signage. And we will also be distributing surveys to residents of the buildings that will be served by these pilot spaces to gauge, the overall level of improvement of accessibility and also gauge the transportation, mode choices that residents of these buildings tend to choose, what their overall transportation patterns are to gauge, how well they are served by these spaces. All right. And with that, I will open up the floor to questions.
Great, thank you so much, Matthew. I see Commissioner Horwitz, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I typed my question in the chat, but I'll read it here, was about accessible RPP spaces and RDPP spaces. Those are not reserved to a specific individual. They can be applied for by an individual, but if somebody else with an ADA placard and, if necessary, a zone permit can park there.
So that will be true. So under the current RDPP program, only the resident who has a permit issued for that space can park there. So that is an applicant for that program would get a reserved space in front of their residence.
Okay.
And again, that's only available for residents, single family owned. Under this program, the space would be open to any driver with a disability placard and eligible zone permit.
Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Falaskini.
Thanks, and thank you, Matthew, for this presentation. Really appreciate it. Seems like a really great program. For the disability RPP program that you're exploring on Fuller Street Northwest, would that take up the entire 1600 block, or is it only for a portion of that block?
Nope, it's only one space, which it's a 24-foot parking space that's in line with the ProWag standards that I went over.
Got it. So it would be kind of in that end of the 1600 block approaching 17th Street, kind of close to Sarah's Circle,
Yeah.
close to that kind of corner of 17th and Fuller Street Northwest.
Correct. It's on the south side of that block, adjacent to
Great.
Sarah.
That's great. And that gives a lot of access to businesses up on Columbia Road, including the hardware store and a couple of restaurants. So it's good positioning to get people both into kind of local housing there, and also to give them access to various businesses up on Columbia Road. Happy to support it. Thank you for the presentation.
No problem. Thank you for the invitation to present.
Are there any other questions from panelists, attendees? Commissioner Stevens?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Smurniol. You've been very helpful to me. He was instrumental in helping to get the ADA parking over at Joseph's house. So, and they were trying to do that for a long, long time. So I'm very grateful. So anyway, this sounds like a really good thing, because I have had trouble, or I have had many requests from people in multifamily buildings who are disabled, who need parking, and I've had, a lot of trouble securing that. So I was very excited to hear about this. Anyway, so my questions for you are, first, I know you're sending out the surveys and you're going to go, through the proper steps and all, but kind of what's your feeling on it? Like, are you getting good feedback, like that you think you guys might expand it, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there any sort of way to tell?
Yeah, well, we haven't conducted any evaluation of this pilot yet. As I explained earlier, haven't actually had all these spaces installed yet. So we were waiting on, all the signage to be installed at all the locations before we evaluate, which was held up in part by our U Street Performance parking pilot that took up a lot of capacity of our sign installation division. So that held up that a little bit, but we'll be conducting evaluations this November. And
Okay. And the second part is, I know it's only one spot right now, but say you got some feedback that maybe adding more spots, and I'm not saying add 3 or 4 or whatever, but say like 2 spots per area. Would that be something that would be considered or doable?
yeah, I mean, we're looking to follow the scoping standards of ProWag eventually. So there's a table in ProWag that tells you, as blocks are altered or construction happens somewhere, then you add the number of required spots according to that table.
Got it. Okay.
But for right now, it's just one space per block at each location.
Okay. And then say the program is expanded, how will you pick the next locations?
Well, that sort of depends on where we go from the pilot evaluation. So
Mhm,
we determined that, we need some more evaluation of it in more locations and we want to expand it.
mhm,
We go through the same process. Again, looking at meter
mhm,
transactions, in proximity to those, high demand parking areas. Uh,
mhm,
if we, move forward with adopting the program, then again, we use that PROAC table and it would
mhm,
happen essentially as, projects going across the city, we would, implement those spaces in according with
mhm.
the federal standards.
Right, got it. Okay. That makes
And
sense.
we would also, have those available on a request basis. The spaces would just need to, again, meet those technical standards of the clear width and adjacent, proximity to curb ramp.
So, okay, so once you start to implement these spaces in a permanent way, it could be by request then, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Oh, great. Okay, perfect. That's all the questions I had.
Are there any further questions for Matthew? Right, it looks like that's it. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we
Thank you.
look forward to seeing the results of your program.
Mm,
Right, bye.
That,
Sorry, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. I just noticed.
There's a Q&A.
There is a Q&A. Yeah.
I didn't even know we had a Q&A.
Lower right.
Looks like he left.
Yeah. Apologies. We can try to follow up with an email to Matt. If you write one of the commissioners here, we can try to ask those to Matthew, or you can just email him directly. Apologies for that. Anonymous question and asker.
Actually, I'm gonna put his email in the chat. If I can find it. There we go. Okay, I did respond to the questions with the email. I actually can't respond in the chat. It only allows me host and panelists. It doesn't allow me everyone. That's weird.
Yeah, that's been the case for a while.
Yeah, I
That
noticed that too.
only Sean can message all attendees.
Okay. Well, I'll put it in here. Sean, if you want to message everyone with the email, go for it. All right, so next up, let's talk streeteries. I'm sure you've all seen the new streeters up on 18th Street where the pilot program is. I do like how seamless that transition is from sidewalk to raised platform. It seems like a nice solution to the problem. Although I do miss Tiki on 18th, I thought they had a great, perfectly built streetery on their own. But I have been able to look through the link about the streeteries, and it all seems pretty good to me, but I do want to just open up to a discussion about what people think. And if there's anything that we want to suggest to the full commission or write a resolution between now and that meeting. Commissioner Falskini?
Generally, I agree. I'm glad that we finally have guidance. I think it's good for everyone to to have a shared sense of what we're going to be doing on this public space. I really like the idea that this public space will now be usable in this way, and also that it will generate tax revenue. My understanding that this is part of the reason why we've had some Department of Transportation revenue drop over the past few years is because we've had more of these streeteries and that space used to be generating income and it's not generating income anymore. And so it'd be good for this to continue to generate income. It's awesome if it's useful, but if people are going to use public space, they should pay for it. So generally think all of that is great. The only challenge that I see with this is along 18th Street. It does appear that some of these new streeteries are bucking into shared road space. So the 18th Street in particular had extra wide lanes that were used for sharrows for part of it, and then for part of it, it was a paint stripped bike lane along 18th Street. And the new streeteries jut out past the parking area into bike and or street lane space, making that quite narrow. And making it a little bit of a challenge for folks who are on bikes going up and down 18th Street, feeling safe. So I've heard from folks who used to bike up and down 18th Street as a normal form of transportation in the past, say that now they really go out of their way to go around 18th Street because it just doesn't feel safe anymore, with the streeteries there. So that would be my only kind of suggestion on this, is that the streetery space shouldn't jut out any further, along with the barriers, the Jersey barriers, shouldn't jut out any further than the parking lane itself, to allow for bikes and cars to share the road on 18th Street. That's my only feedback. It doesn't seem to be a part of the streetery's guidance. Otherwise, I read through the guidance. It appears to be good as far as I can tell. I would like to at least offer up a space for us to be able to consider it as a full ANC in November, and to either decide to submit a resolution about it in support, or to decide not to, but at least to from this committee to agree to set that time aside, to suggest that we set that time aside in our November ANC meeting, and then we can ditch it if we don't need it, but at least to reserve it for now in case the ANC does want to make a resolution on this. That's it.
Okay. I just have one question for you. I haven't looked specifically at the space between the edge of the streetery, the block and the street, but I do notice on Google Maps, the current Google Map image shows those cement barriers probably like in the middle of the bike lane. Are you saying that it's actually gotten worse with this new approach, or is it about the same?
It's about the same, maybe a little bit better than it was previously. They're a little bit further in, not fully in where the bike lane was, but they're sticking about halfway into where the bike lane was, where it existed. At least from what I could tell when they were going in and doing it. These Jersey barriers are a little bit skinnier, so, and they are, because all of the platforms are uniform, they can get them really close up and tight to the platforms, which is great. So they have been able to, at least from my estimation, push it in like maybe, a foot or two, but not fully the length of or the width of a bike lane.
Okay.
And yeah, I read the new regs, and they do say that the Jersey barriers should be at least 12 inches from a bike lane. I can't I guess I can share my screen. I'm just to look at the same thing right here. So railings are at least 2 feet from a bike lane, and barriers should be 12 inches from a bike lane.
Hmm.
So I don't know if the new if what you're seeing is compliant with that. But just to point out to attendees or those watching online about what we're talking about, here is the view on Google Maps, and you can see this painted bike lane right here and the barriers that are, taking up half, or on the other side, the full bike lane. And obviously these are, not as of today necessarily, but as you get higher, again, full bike lane or partial bike lane being taken up.
So then, does that mean that this pilot program is already not compliant with their own guidelines?
Kristen Barden just wrote in the Q&A that that is true. So that they are not compliant with these new guidelines,
Huh.
which is wild to me that they did this entire pilot program and made it non-compliant with the guidelines that they are going to put out like less than 2 weeks later. I don't know, Kristen, I don't know if you want to engage in this conversation at all. I would certainly appreciate any insight that you could share here. So if you want to raise your hand and engage, I certainly would appreciate it. But Commissioner Dixon chairs the committee, so that decision is up to him.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So Jake, sorry, you misread what I wrote. I was responding to what Lee was saying about Tiki and some of the other streeteries. So all of the previous streeteries that were built on 18th Street before the pilot, none of them were compliant with the new regs. So all of them would have had to have been dismantled and discarded, and all of the businesses would have had to start over again. So part of the initiative of the pilot, part of the argument to DDOT for the pilot was that it was going to be a huge burden to the businesses to have to, start over again to be compliant with the new regs whenever the new regs go into effect. Like that, we're still not sure when that might happen. It's probably at least a year away. But anyway, so DDOT wanted to do a pilot to demonstrate the new regs. So all of the new streeteries as they were built with the platforms, with the railings, with the overhead structures, these are all compliant with the new regs. So all of the new, stuff that was built under the pilot is all compliant with the new regs. And that was the whole purpose, was to demonstrate the new regs, and how it could look, how it could be implemented.
Commissioner Felskini.
I'm having a hard time seeing how they're compliant with that that regulation that they be at least a foot in from a bike lane. Because they're clearly jutting out into the bike lanes. So I'm having a hard time seeing how these are compliant with that regulation.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask Kim Baca about that. Because because she managed this project for DDOT. So yeah. But I do know that, part of the goal was, with the new Jersey barriers was to get the new ones that are narrower, to push them right up against the platforms. So there's no gap there, so it's all tight. However, the platforms are all, less than a foot from the curb to provide that stormwater management. So, and then there's a transition plate, a metal plate that goes between the platform and the curb to provide that ADA accessibility. And also that metal plate is on a hinge and it can be lifted up so that you can clean underneath the platforms as well. So that's all part of the design.
I mean, it makes me
yeah,
wonder if maybe they have like multiple sizes of these and they just put in a size that maybe isn't a good fit for 18th. It's very interesting how they're already not following their own guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, because they were all standard size from the manufacturer, so yeah, but I do know that the streeter is on the west side, because that parking lane is narrower than the east side. Those are smaller. And those on the west side couldn't get the roof structures because the roof structures are a standard size. So they weren't eligible because the platforms weren't the same size, right? So so some of it may have to do with the roof structures as well, since those were a standard size. In order to fit on the platforms, they might have built them as they did to, so that it all worked. Does that make sense? Yeah, but I know on the west side, unfortunately, because it's a narrower parking lane than the east side, those streeters are smaller.
Um, unrelated, so I don't want to take away from the particular conversation.
Like you're changing subjects
Yeah,
or
yeah. Also in streeteries, but a different issue than the bike lane specifically.
okay. I mean, let's just talk about it all. I mean, the only comment I have specifically about the bike lanes is it puts us in
Yeah.
a weird position where like we write a resolution saying follow your own guidelines. Like, what do you even do with
Yeah.
that?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And well, enforcement is an issue that I want to talk about in that
Okay.
resolution. Um, what's the process for getting unsanctioned streeteries or streeteries that where let's say somebody has moved the barriers to give themselves an extra few feet. What's the process for warnings and such, and penalties associated. One thing that I wanted to mention that I appreciated in the guidelines, but I've noticed personally biking on the counterflow bike lanes north on 17th Street, south is of us, is that some of the streeteries, including that have overhead, are immediately adjacent to crosswalks in a way that provides no line of sight. If you're biking, and there's not a bike stop sign, but you're biking across a crosswalk and you cannot see somebody who is just 1 foot to the right of the streetery. I was just gonna share an image of currently this is the bike lane going north to the left, and you've got a complete barrier to line of sight for this crosswalk as you bike past it. And that is something that under the new guidelines, they have to be at least, I think it was 25 feet if there's a overhead, or at least 10 feet if there's not an overhead from any crosswalk. So I just want to commend the guidelines for that and mention that as an issue that I've personally faced.
I mean,
That's
actually,
much better.
almost a different view on that because I feel like these new platforms offer quite a lot of visibility as there's really no physical wall. So you should be able to kind of see through them, which is something I actually like about them.
Yeah, agreed.
25 feet seems like a lot, but yeah. So does anyone else have anything that they want to say about this, or do you want to come to a consensus about a recommendation to the full ANC? Commissioner Stevens, you're on mute.
Okay, so I have probably a very silly question. Okay, so I did read through the guidelines and it looked like, mostly code type things, dimensions, details, about compliance and such. Um, but I guess what am I trying to say? I like the standardization. I like, uniformity to a certain degree. But I guess one thing I know I love about the street reads is the creativity that has been presented. So I couldn't tell from the guidelines. Basically, is there any decoration or difference in lighting in terms of light fixtures and things like that? Is any of that allowed? Like, would it be able to be personalized by the business to any type of degree?
Kristen Barden,
Yeah, maybe Kristen can answer that one, I'm thinking.
she said, yes, lighting is allowed.
Okay, lighting. All
I've
right.
also seen, I think it was TK on 18th, they still had their big planters out and they put like around it. So I know that actually made it look really nice and inviting.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's all. Yeah, they can personalize it in any way that they want, right?
Mhm.
So, with plants, with lighting. The one thing about lighting is that they're gonna have to run conduit, one conduit from the building facade, at least 8 feet above the sidewalk. They're gonna have to run that to the streetery to have electricity out there. So, but they can also use the lanterns. Sorry, I'm not remember the propane. If they don't have a roof structure, they can use the propane heaters. They can use electric heaters, but they have to run conduit from the building to there. So that requires a building permit, inspection from the fire marshal. It's going to require a few more steps. But I do know, Daniel, to your question about enforcement. So as part of the new regs, they're gonna have to get a building permit for whatever it is that they decide to build. So there will be inspections, there will be, a process there under the new regs. So, and there really hasn't been that kind of regulatory process, for these last 4 years since the program started. So that's a new part of it as well.
All right, thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, sure. One thing about the public space fees that I've heard that you might want to comment on is they're proposing a $20 per square foot annual public space fee for use of the space. As you know, the space has been free since June 2020 when the program was started. That rate is much higher than the standard sidewalk cafe annual permit fee. So I've heard a lot of grumbling about that.
How
So
much higher is it?
it's I think that fee is like $12 a square foot, so it's like $8 more. And they kind of, businesses see it as kind of the same thing, right? It's outdoor dining. So they think it should be on par with the sidewalk cafe annual permit fee, and it shouldn't be any higher than that. So yeah.
And
So I
that
think
$20 per square foot, is that it's an annual fee?
yeah,
Okay.
annual fee, yeah. Yeah, they're also gonna have to pay for the Jersey barriers too. So those are not gonna be free. Those will be, I think that's included in the regs. If you look into the fees, there's a one-time payment for each Jersey barrier. And there's different types of barriers that will be required depending on the type of road that it is. If it's a minor artery or a major artery, et cetera. So there's different types of barriers required. And DDOT is happy to, give those to businesses to use for streeteries. They would prefer that actually, that businesses use the DDOT stuff, and it'll be cheaper if they do, but they are going to charge for the Jersey barriers.
And is that also like an annual fee? Is it just a one? Oh, you said it was a one-time.
It's a one-time thing, yeah, for the barriers, yeah.
Are they purchasing them or are they leasing them?
No, it's a one-time, like, non-refundable deposit, if you will, so, I mean, because they're gonna, the Jersey Bears are gonna really be property of DDOT, but they want them to be used, like they want their federal dot approved barriers to be used, right? So, but there is, they do have a cost in getting them, so they're trying to offset that cost somewhat. But they do want businesses to use, their barriers. So, and it would be cheaper for the business to use their barriers than if they were to go and try to buy them from some construction supply company. So
maybe I looked over that. Is that fee like public knowledge? I don't remember reading that.
yeah, it should be in the regs.
Okay.
It's towards the bottom. It's towards the end. If I remember.
I have it here. I'll share real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, but they are really encouraging businesses to personalize the space. I mean, they want them to. They also want them to put up some signage too, saying this is, Tiki's outdoor, cafe space. Yeah.
And
so, yeah.
But I've seen some streeteries that have hung hanging planters with vines coming down that would obstruct the sort of direct line of sight within the overhead. That would not be allowed. It would have to be a freestanding planter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there won't be anything allowed that obstructs being able to see through it. Yeah, nothing higher than 42 inches.
Yeah,
from the ground.
So, Kristen, I have a question for you about these Jersey barriers. I mean, to me, that fee is pretty steep. I mean,
Yeah,
800 per
yeah, no,
block
it is.
plus 500. So, when these
Yeah,
previous
it's a lot.
streeters that they created and put up, did they have to pay a fee for the blocks that they're using or were using, or were those just the city put those in for free?
Yeah, the city put those in for free, and they were all old, Jersey barriers that like were in storage someplace that they got out during the pandemic. So the ones the new ones that are part of the pilot project, those are all brand new, and they're more of the standard ones that are used now. So they're more narrow. They don't have to be locked to one another. It's a better product overall. Yeah, but no, that fee is really steep for the Jersey
Um,
barriers.
and
So that's
do you
another
know
thing that
roughly how many Jersey barriers the average business on 18th Street would have to lease or whatever the term is?
probably 2 or 3. Yeah. Depending on, where they are. But at least 2 or 3. Yeah.
Would commissioners be in support of some mention of some kind of tiered fee structure depending on I'm trying to think of what criteria could be used to allow small businesses and local restaurants to afford these fees.
Feels like an annual leasing fee should be the way that this operates, as opposed to like a one time with a huge deposit. It should just be it should be a leasing fee, with a returnable deposit. At the end, if they're returned back in the same, like a normal deposit. It just feels like forcing the businesses to buy them is again, like a barrier to entry that hits smaller businesses harder than it hits more established businesses that have been around for a lot longer.
I'd be willing to have some sort of language in terms of the financial um
and I'd also
aspect,
Mhm. Yeah, and then also in terms of bringing the square footage fee in line with sidewalk cafes.
I'm in support of that.
I'm very excited to have more more street cafe culture. And I want to make it really possible for them to do this in a safe, sustainable way that doesn't get in the way of, sidewalk usage and bike lane usage and
Mhm.
pedestrian safety and all that. Anything we can do to facilitate this. And, frankly, for me, it really, the value of it offsets whatever reduced revenues. This should not be a revenue replacement strategy.
Okay, so what do you all think that we should do next? Do you think we just bring these ideas to the meeting? Do you think we write a draft resolution to be voted on? What does everyone think?
I think a draft resolution sounds like we're all generally in support of the Streeteries guidance. I'd love to take other folks' temperature on getting our bike lanes back on 18th Street. And whether or not that would be something that we would see as needing to be in compliance along 18th Street. Fully support Daniel's 2 points. And then generally, I think it would just say, whereas, DDOT took 3 years to write these Streeteries guidance and then asked for our feedback in a month and a half. Whereas here's the guidance, therefore be it resolved, here's our, we're generally in support with these 3 caveats. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
Yep. Just taking some notes. Yeah, I mean, also it seems like these treaters might be a little bit smaller than the previous ones. So, you might be taking away some of the square footage and then increasing these fees. It just seems a little cruel. Like I understand that they need money to do this, but it just seems a little cruel to me. So I do think, yeah, I just think it's a good idea that we bring these things up in the draft resolution. Does anyone want to take a stab at a first draft? I'm happy to if no one wants to. I can probably do that at some point. I hope we have to do that soon.
I can help you with it, Lee. I'm
Okay.
like maybe the two of us together can do a draft resolution and present it. I guess we'd need to send it around to folks by probably this time next week for the following week to take a look at it. So yeah, it needs to be pretty quick, but it also doesn't have to be too extensive. I think this could be pretty simple.
You know, and they have a special hearing on November 14th to adopt the guidelines. So, you know, we really do need to get something in right after our meeting if they're gonna take those into consideration. It seems like to me really half you know, not even a real attempt to solicit public input.
Yeah, I'm getting that sense too. Okay. Then Commissioner Felskine, why don't we chat offline briefly? Then we can get started and share with everyone else. Okay.
Sounds great. And thanks everyone for adding this to the agenda at the last minute. Really appreciate it.
So are we taking a vote on recommending a resolution to be circulated to the full committee, full commission?
I would support that resolution if you so, or that.
I will make that motion to recommend the full commission take up a resolution that will be drafted and circulated in advance of the full commission hearing on November 6th. And yeah.
Okay.
Second.
Those in favor, say aye. Aye.
I
Great. All right, I will let Peter know. And then Commissioner Felskine will talk offline. All right, thanks everyone. I appreciate your
thank
time.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Have a
Bye.
great night.